My name is Richard Caldwell. I am 70 years old, at my only daughter's wedding, in front of 900 of Boston's elite. My new son-in-law's father threw a glass of ice water directly in my face and called me an uncultured mechanic who did not belong there. I stood there dripping wet and asked him one question. Do you really know who you just insulted? What none of them knew was that I had anonymously paid for their entire wedding, and that I was the billionaire founder of a global shipping empire, hiding behind a rented tuxedo and an old pickup truck. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you are listening from. Now let me take you back to a quiet promise I made my daughter, and the price it nearly cost us both. I raised Sarah alone after her mother passed when she was small, building coal logistics from nothing into a shipping empire worth over $2 billion. All of it kept quietly anonymous. When Sarah fell in love with Preston Kensington, son of Boston high society, she begged me to let his family take credit for funding the wedding. $500,000. I wired anonymously so she could finally be accepted among their peers. I agreed because I never could say no to her, and sat quietly at a corner table, dressed like a retired laborer, while the Kensingtons believed they had generously funded the wedding of the decade. I did not yet understand how deliberately Preston had spent the past year building invisible walls around my daughter, convincing her to quit her career, isolating her in his family's gated estate, slowly becoming her only source of truth. At the reception, Victor Kensington threw a glass of ice water in my face in front of the entire ballroom, calling me an uncultured mechanic who never belonged there. I stood in stunned silence, and when I looked for Sarah to defend me, she wept silently and looked away instead. Preston grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the exit, hissing that I was embarrassing her. Outside in the freezing rain, Preston caught up with a perfectly rehearsed apology, blaming his father's heart medication and alcohol for a manic episode, asking me to be the bigger person and return to my hotel. I agreed quietly, though something about the story felt too convenient to be entirely true. At my hotel, I learned my reservation had been canceled 2 hours earlier. Authorized personally by Preston, my luggage already couriered to a rundown motel 20 miles outside the city. This was not the panic of a stressed groom. It was a surgical strike to isolate me completely. Sitting alone in that motel room, I remembered a folder Preston had brought Sarah to sign a week earlier, unmarked, embossed with the crest of the exact private bank holding her $10 million trust fund, the one I had quietly set up 20 years ago. Sarah believed it was my entire life savings, a lucky windfall, never knowing the truth of what I actually controlled. Preston, it seemed, had learned enough to begin moving toward it. I called my longtime attorney, Marcus Webb, that same night from the motel, and by morning, we had pulled Sarah's trust documentation and confirmed exactly what those signed papers had authorized. A joint account restructuring that quietly gave Preston access to funds far beyond what a simple tax disclosure required. I wish this had gone differently. I wish my daughter had trusted her own instincts sooner, instead of signing whatever her husband placed in front of her. But wishes do not undo a year of careful isolation. The truth does. I sat in that motel room and let myself grieve, briefly, the version of that wedding night I had imagined for 20 years, before turning my full attention to what needed to happen next. Just before midnight, Marcus confirmed the trust's protective clauses were still intact, requiring my signature for any withdrawal beyond a modest threshold, a safeguard I had built in decades earlier without ever expecting to need it. I authorized an emergency freeze on the account first thing the following morning. 12:03, I am 70 years old, I am. For the first time since that ballroom, no longer the humiliated old man in a rented tuxedo across the city. Preston was almost certainly still confident his plan was moving forward, exactly as designed, with no idea the account he was targeting had just been sealed shut by the very man he threw out into the rain. The next morning, I met Sarah alone, away from Preston, and showed her the trust documents alongside what she had actually signed. Her face went through every stage of understanding exactly how completely she had been managed over the past year. I did not raise my voice. I simply told her the truth, the same way I always had. Preston's attempted withdrawal failed within days, once the freeze took effect, and when confronted, his explanations collapsed exactly as quickly as his father's excuse had. At that wedding, he looked at me the way he always had, expecting the harmless old man from the corner table. I was not that man, and I had not been for a very long time. I built an empire believing that quiet strength speaks louder than any room full of crystal glasses ever could. I always thought that lesson belonged only in boardrooms. I understand now, it protects the people I love most, just as completely. Preston's marriage to Sarah did not survive what followed, and the trust remains fully secured under her name alone. As for me, I finally told my daughter the truth about who I really am, and for the first time in years, she looked at me without needing to look away. I think about that ballroom every time I see her now, steady, clear-eyed, finally free of walls that were never meant to protect her at all, and I think, the truth always finds the room eventually, no matter how many crystal glasses stand in its way. If you have ever been underestimated by people who never once bothered to learn who you really were, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, and if this one moved you, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Tales. There is more where this came from.